Hello and welcome to the Eternity Wars gameplay video. This video will feature the base set and a battle between the Thaw clans and the Vulcan Empire. Both players have already constructed their deck and the reserve deck and are ready to begin the game. The Thaw player flips a damage token to determine who will go first. He then places 3 cards face down in between each player's government center to set up the battlefield. These 3 cards each represent a zone, and together they create a lane. At the beginning of the game, there is only one lane, as determined by both players' government center. Once players build additional buildings, more lanes will open up, allowing them access to move and deploy additional units in. Each player then draws a 5-card hand, but the Thaw player doesn't like his hand and chooses to mulligan. He shuffles his deck and redraws a new 5 cards. However, he still is not satisfied with his hand, and he shuffles his deck once again and draws another 5. This time, the player must discard one of the cards from his 5-card hand. The card is then placed in the dead zone. If he wanted to do this again, he would have to discard 2 cards next time, and again, it would be 3, and so forth. The Vulcan player begins the game. He builds a farm next to his keep, opening up a new lane for himself and expanding the battlefield. He then chooses to end his turn. The Thaw player does the same thing after he draws his card for the turn. He plays a training hut, opens up a new lane for himself, and ends the turn. The Vulcan player then goes to his second turn. He draws his card, and then considers activating his farm's ability to slash and burn, which will give his building double gold for the turn, but at the expense of it producing no gold his following turn. He chooses not to activate the ability, and instead just collects the standard amount of gold that building produces. Each building produces at least 2 gold, but his farm and his keep both produce 4 gold apiece. He then chooses to end his resource phase and move on to the building and recruitment phase, where he may construct additional buildings and deploy units. He chooses to construct a town. Unlike the farm, the town only produces 2 gold per turn, but it allows him to draw an additional card each turn. He then deploys a unit of Vulcan archers into one of his deployment zones. It is a ranged unit, capable of initiating ranged attacks against enemy units from a distance. The Vulcan player then moves on to his combat phase, where he chooses to do nothing. He moves to his final phase and ends the turn. All player may then proceed to his resource phase, where he draws his card for the turn and collects all his gold from his buildings. He moves on to his building and recruitment phase, where he constructs a catapult, a building capable of launching artillery strikes against enemy buildings. He wastes no time and goes right into his combat phase to load up his catapult and launch projectiles at the Vulcan player's buildings. The projectile is fired indirectly, and the Vulcan player gets to decide which building the damage will be dealt to. However, he may not split the damage between 2 different buildings. Both damage must be dealt to a single building. It is then the Vulcan player's turn. He draws his normal card for the turn, and then activates his town's ability to draw an additional card. He chooses to activate his farm's ability to slash and burn, gaining double gold for this turn, but no gold his following turn. He moves to his building and recruitment phase, where he chooses to construct a guard tower. It is a powerful defensive building with a ranged attack, capable of attacking enemy units if they reach his deployment zone. He deploys a unit of elite Vulcan, and then deploys a unit of militia. The Vulcan player goes to his combat phase. He maneuvers his units tactically, advancing his elite Vulcan unit forward to gain an aggressive foothold, while positioning his archers behind the unit for added coverage. He passes the turn, satisfied with his military's formation. It is now the Thaw player's turn. After drawing his card and collecting his resources, he goes right to his building and recruitment phase. He deploys a ranged unit of axe throwers, and then deploys a Thaw warband. Both units have an ability called Shock and Awe that only activates if 2 units with the ability Shock and Awe are deployed in one turn. When the ability is activated, each of his units may do 2 damage to a target unit and reduce that unit's attack damage power by 2. The Thaw player chooses to deal all the damage to the enemy elite Vulcan unit and receives a total of 4 damage and has its attack damage power reduced from 5 down to 1. The Thaw player then moves to his combat phase. He may choose to attack with all of his units first and then move with them all, or move with all of his units first and then attack with them all. They all have to do the same thing together. He chooses to attack and then move. He attacks the enemy elite Vulcan unit with his warband, dealing 4 melee attack damage to it. The elite Vulcan unit is allowed to retaliate, and applies its melee attack damage to the warband. Normally this damage would be 5, but because of the Shock and Awe ability, it is only reduced to 1 damage. The elite Vulcan's defense is reduced down to 0, and is then destroyed and placed into the dead zone, while the Thaw warband has only received 1 damage out of its 2 total defense, meaning it's still alive. Its ability Bloody Combat is activated because it destroyed a unit that was affected by Shock and Awe this turn. This gives the unit an additional move action and attack action that may be activated in any order. But the Thaw player chooses to finish his initial combat before activating the ability. He initiates a ranged attack with his axe throwers against the enemy militia unit. It is dealt 2 ranged damage and is destroyed. Because it was a ranged attack, the militia unit may not retaliate to it, leaving the axe throwers unscathed. He then activates his Bloody Combat ability to move and attack with his warband once again. The warband launches an aggressive attack against the unit of Vulcan archers. It is dealt 4 damage and is destroyed, but not before retaliating to the warband's attack and dealing 1 damage to it, taking it down with him. He then fires his catapult late. He was supposed to activate the ability at the beginning of his combat phase, and now we are nearing the end of it. In competitive play, a missed trigger is ignored and may not be activated once the conditions that allow it to be activated are passed. But because this is a casual game, both players allow the catapult's late activation to go through. The projectile is fired, and the Vulcan player chooses to do all the damage to his guard tower. The Thal player ends his turn, and now the Vulcan player goes. He draws his 1 card for the turn, and then activates his town to draw his 2nd card. Because he used his farm slash and burn ability last turn, he may not collect any gold from it this turn. He spends 6 gold to construct a stone fort, which gives a defensive bonus to all his buildings. He moves on to his final phase, where he chooses to activate his government center's ability, Intelligence Network. This ability allows him to spend 1 gold to look at the top card of his deck and choose to either leave it there or place it on the bottom of his deck. Once he has done this, he chooses to pass the turn. The Thal player proceeds to his turn. He built his 2nd catapult. Even though his siege capabilities are now doubled, it doesn't matter because the Vulcan player's stone fort gives each and every building he controls +2 defense. He deploys another Thal warband. He then goes to combat and activates both of his catapults. He aggressively advances his units and then ends the turn. During the Vulcan player's resource phase, he counts how much gold he will be able to collect this turn. He decides to once again activate the slash and burn ability on his farm, doubling the amount of gold that it will produce this turn. His total gold count for the turn will go from 14 all the way up to 18. During his building and recruitment phase, he deploys Emperor Brutus, a leader unit that gives defensive boosts to all units he controls. He then deploys another unit of Vulcan archers, right next to his Emperor. He moves to his combat phase and chooses to attack and then move. He has Emperor Brutus attack and deal 4 damage to the warband, destroying it, but also receiving 4 damage in retaliation. He then initiates a ranged attack with his Vulcan archers against the axe throwers, destroying the axe throwers outright. Once he has completed attacks, he moves his Emperor and his archers. He finishes his turn by once again activating his Intelligence Network ability to look at the top card of his deck. The Thal player moves on to his turn. Realizing he is behind, he deploys a powerful elite unit known as the Chosen Ones. It has an ability that drastically reduces the attack damage of powerful units like the Emperor. He then chooses to bury a card by paying 2 gold to discard a card from his hand and draw a new one. He may do this with any card at any time during his turn. The Thal player moves to combat and uses his unit of Chosen Ones to smash the Emperor. But before he is able to attack, the Vulcan player reminds the Thal player that he has forgotten to activate his catapults. Any player may activate a triggered ability as long as it does not have a may in its explanation. The Vulcan player applies the catapult damage to his buildings, and then applies the damage to his Emperor, and removes him from play. The Thal player advances his Chosen Ones forward to face the Vulcan archers. The Vulcan player goes, and during his building and recruitment phase, deploys Captain Link, and a unit of Vulcan infantry. He advances his infantry forward, and positions Captain Link behind them, and then initiates a close-range melee attack with his Vulcan archers. The attack is nothing but a scratch to the Chosen One's unit, and it retaliates with a devastating attack that destroys the Vulcan archers outright. But just like any unit, the Chosen Ones are only allowed to retaliate once per turn. The Vulcan infantry decisively attack the Chosen Ones. Aided by an offensive bonus by Captain Link's leadership ability, they inflict critical damage on the elite Thal unit. However, they are a very rugged unit, and during every final phase, they are allowed to heal away 1 damage dealt to them. The Thal player takes his turn and constructs a Hut of the Chosen building that gives all units the lane that exists in +2 attack and +1 defense. He then deploys another unit of axe throwers, utilizing their garrison ability that allows them to be deployed and move in and out of their buildings. When garrisoned in a building, the axe throwers gain that building's defense value instead of using their own. The Thal player moves to combat and once again fires off both of his catapults. He moves his unit of Chosen Ones forward, placing them right in front of the enemy government center. All he has to do is destroy the enemy government center, and he wins the game. He initiates a ranged attack with his axe throwers, doing 2 damage to the Vulcan infantry. He then decides not to attack the enemy government center, but instead to use his Chosen One unit to attack Captain Link. The unit is able to destroy the captain, but also receives fatal damage and is destroyed. The Vulcan player goes, once again activating Slash and Burn to gain double gold. He spends some time thinking tactically about his next move. He decides to construct both a farm and a guard tower. Then he spends additional gold to recruit another unit of Vulcan infantry. When he moves to his combat phase, he decides to move both of his Vulcan infantry forward. He has one of his infantry units attack the building that the axe throwers are garrisoned in. The building absorbs the damage and stands strong. During the final phase, he activates his town's infrastructure maintenance ability to heal 1 damage, before once again passing the turn. During his turn, the Thal player deploys a unit of bandits into the zone in front of his chosen one's building, giving them an additional +2 attack and +1 defense. He moves to his combat phase, but it triggers the Vulcan infantry's strategic assault ability that allows it to attack at the beginning of the opposing player's combat phase. Before the Thal player is able to act, the Vulcan infantry swiftly destroy the building the axe throwers are garrisoned in, causing it to collapse and destroying the axe throwers in the process. By destroying the building, the Thal player loses access to that lane. Units may no longer move into the lane, and units that were already in it are considered to be cut off. In a desperate attempt to counterstrike, the Thal player launches both of his catapults. He then directs his bandits to attack the infantry unit. They destroy each other, but the bandits are able to activate their theft ability to take 2 gold from the opposing player's next turn. The Vulcan player goes again. He collects his gold, minusing the slash and burn farm, and then minusing an additional 2 gold as a result of the bandit's theft ability. He had forgotten to play a unit of Vulcan Rangers during his opposing player's last turn. The Rangers have a special ability that allows them to be deployed during the opposing player's turn in their deployment zone. The Thal player is kind and allows the Rangers to be deployed now as though it were during his turn. They also have an ability called Scout that requires the Thal player discard a card when they enter play. During his building and recruitment phase, the Vulcan player deploys another unit of Elite Vulcan, as well as a unit of Militia. During the combat phase, he moves the Elite Vulcan and a Vulcan infantry unit forward. He initiates a melee attack with his Rangers against the Thal Government Center, and a melee attack with his Vulcan infantry against the catapult. It's the Thal player's turn now. He buries a card and draws a new one. Not happy with his draw, he buries another card for 2 more gold and draws another one. Finally, he pays 4 gold to construct a slaughterhouse, reopening that lane for his use. At the beginning of the combat, the Vulcan infantry once again initiate their strategic assault ability and destroy the catapult. The Thal player uses his last remaining catapult to fire. The Vulcan player places the damage, and that's all the Thal player can do this turn. He passes. The Vulcan player plays another unit. He maneuvers his units during the combat phase and initiates attacks. The Vulcan infantry deals 2 damage to the government center and ends his turn. During the Thal player's next combat phase, the Vulcan infantry's strategic assault ability will activate once again, allowing it to destroy the government center once and for all. With the Thal government center destroyed, the Vulcan player has won the battle and the game is now over. We hope you enjoyed this gameplay video of Eternity Wars, the card game.